Let me start by giving a bit of a context onto how I approach the funding question. Earlier in the year, I was part of a group called Fashion Producer Collective, which is a group of manufacturers who actually looked at the funding challenge in the fashion industry and asked what are the specific issues we need to resolve. And one thing we found out was that there were two key assumptions that were persistent in the industry when we talk about funding. The first one was it was all about debt. And the second one was that a lot of the programs that was out there focusing on debt was also focusing on perhaps the top 5% of the fashion industry. The challenge in terms of studying this, and we created a model to analyze this, and we asked, in terms of funding, first, is the funding available for suppliers? Second, is the funding affordable for the suppliers? And the third one, is the funding accessible? And the accessibility question was perhaps the most interesting one, for the sole reason that quite a lot of manufacturers were heavily leveraged, so they were not in a position to accept more debt into their portfolio. And our industry, as you know, is quite volatile. So being in a volatile industry also has its constraints because you are hesitant to take out additional commitments in terms of finances to address that. Now, I represent a large company, and we have not had huge challenges in accessing funds, and quite a lot of them in either sustainability-linked loans or green financing options. But I want us to kind of think about the agenda for the day as to being, we are not trying to really resolve a problem for the large companies who have good balance sheets. If they are not taking climate action, it's not because they don't have access to funding. But what we are here is to solve a climate problem, and solving a climate problem for the industry requires us to decarbonize across the industry. So the question really is that, is the funding that is coming from all the organizations that we are talking about really reaching the people who need it? Or is it making companies like us a little bit more profitable because we are getting a little bit more cheaper funding? So I want us to bear this in mind as we speak, because the challenge with climate is kind of interesting, because either we succeed collectively or we fail, right? It's not about whether me as a company can decarbonize or H&M as a brand can decarbonize the supply chain. It's how we look at decarbonization in a much more broader. So I want to start the questions. I want to start with Mr. Abdus Subhan. I think it would be good as a manufacturer to hear what are the key sustainability funding challenges you have as a company, and being a large company at that. And I want you to address maybe two things. One is, within the sustainability space, there are two types of investments. One is investments that actually have a payback, and one is the investments that may not have a payback but might also increase operational cost. And we also spoke a little bit about adaptation. Now, anything that we do in adaptation space is also going to increase costs as opposed to giving a payback. How do you see the landscape? What challenges do you have that you can see, and what might be the solutions that is in front of us?
Thank you. Thank you, esteemed audience, panelists, and the organizers. Special thanks to Mostafuddin, who has taken all the efforts to organize such effective event. And it's me, Abdul Subhan, I'm Managing Director of Architects Group. Regarding the decarbonization investment challenge, we as a manufacturer, what we face firstly is, in true sense, easy access to the fund management. Though we talk publicly or some event like this, but practically it's not like this. So there is a lot of bureaucratic drugs, though we have some great funds in central bank, maybe with the help of our developing partners, but we have some bitter experience that to approach this fund, it's a very long and very complex bureaucratic drugs is there behind the scene. So I think concerned authorities, especially government, should look forward to make it more easy. And at the same time, we as a investor, we have some financial limitations. So investment in decarbonization or greenhouse gas emissions, which we discussed and we hear today, Thomas. We need this kind of policy support and real sustainable policy support. And we as a company, sometimes we are not convinced that we should invest largely without having no return directly in short time. But we feel that as a responsible manufacturer, it is our duty to think forward for a better tomorrow. So as a part of that, directly maybe we do not feel that there is a good impact in our business, but in long term there is a good impact in the business that we as a responsible manufacturer, if we think this way, then our market share in the eco-friendly markets will be more, of course, because we are very much optimistic that the new generation especially, they are more focused on these issues and they want to see the sustainable tomorrow, and this buying group is increasing day by day. And awareness and mindset is another challenges, I think. And I do not know, I have another opportunity, but I want to put something little bit more extra here that whatever we say, there is thousands of slogans, thousands of initiatives regarding this sustainable approach in the world. If I make a summary, one or two areas, very nucleus areas is not very highly discussed. That means this sustainability approach, in my opinion, the foundation should be a sustainable mindset. And for this sustainable mindset, to me, we need a very pure and very honest love for the humanity. If as an individual we have some love or affection for the humanity, then our mindset will be sustainable. And that can bring and breeze the all initiatives and all kind of talks, because I myself controlled by my own philosophy. My company will be affected by my philosophy. So my honest request to all audience that we have to rethink that sustainable approach to the material, sustainable approach to the energy, but what is sustainable approach to the mindset, which is the nucleus of the all requirements and all initiatives. So in my opinion, and in my company, I have a philosophy that we are human beings, so we have to make money, that we should not be so much money-minded. We do not need so much of money in our life for healthy family life or healthy lifestyle. So maybe for basic needs, we need some money, but for status upgradation, we do not need too much of money. So this kind of clear concept, if we have, then this decarbonization issues, sustainability issues, carbon footprint, there is a lot of issues. So if we have some love for the humanity, then we cannot destroy the world. So we have to take initiatives accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My next question is to Elvan. I think one of the things we know about H&M is it's one of the companies who's been in the forefront in terms of creating funding for the supply chain partners to leverage. So I have two questions to you, and one is to kind of tell us briefly about the kind of funding you've created and how successful they were in terms of how much money has been disbursed and how many partners. But also, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is this conversation around how do we fund decarbonization beyond debt. Have you looked at any models that can be sitting outside the debt space in terms of working with manufacturers and your suppliers in terms of decarbonization and climate action?
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for everyone for staying so late to listen to us. The first question for the H&M's on funding, we have started journey to have our own GFI Green Fashion Initiative funding. So we have started to work with our suppliers to give them financial support. Some of the initiatives were direct financial investments and some was around better finance offers. So we have initiated this a few years ago. I don't have the total investment numbers in mind so far, but we have been investing in the companies in many countries: Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, China, Turkey, Vietnam. I can give some examples from Bangladesh. We have directly funded one of the solar panel projects in one of our factories. Especially we want to prioritize the innovative and new technologies, because this is what we also believe the technology needs to come together with the investments. So we have invested in the thin solar panels where we know that there was a challenge in our factories for decarbonization due to shed loading. So we wanted to both encourage the entrepreneurs and also encourage our suppliers to try these new technologies. So we had the direct funding for this. The panels were installed a few months ago, and as we know, they are operating fine, and the suppliers are getting the impacts. We will see their results, carbon reduction results, by end of the year. Another investment we have done together with the Chorka. We are now supporting 3 innovative technology: Revozona, Imogo, and Pluvia. So the first time in the world, these 3 technologies coming under the same roof, and they will be assessed in the Chorka facilities. With this one, we are aiming to have a dramatic energy, water, and chemical reductions. And this one is full collaboration with our supplier, where H&M is also contributing in the funding. And we have some other suppliers where we are working with the financial support on the biomass boiler. So we have many examples also on that technology. So this is more internal support, but we have also started to collaborate with broader groups. We have been part of Apparel Impact Institute's Fashion Climate Fund. Also, we are now partnering with several brands. Maybe if you heard it, the Future Supply Initiative. So going through to your second question, in the bigger scale, what can be done? I think the most important part is how to collaborate several partners together, because it's not going to be only one party's funding solutions. This needs to come from collective and collaborative approach. That's why some of the finance institutes and some of the brands came together, and we are going to create a funding for some shared suppliers to reach out to a bigger group, also to provide technical support and technical assessment to them. I think this kind of examples and practices is going to help in the industry level decarbonization to be easier. One thing that also we want to set example by the wind farm. You may have heard that together with Bestseller, we have signed the letter of intent to co-invest in the wind farm in Bangladesh. So this is facilitated by Global Fashion Agenda and also Copenhagen infrastructure partners. So beyond our own supply chain, also to support the decarbonization in the country, we are also looking into how we can invest in the renewables, because we believe we need to have investments, policies, and regulations enable in the country, and people or companies like H&M needs to set the example. So that can be scaled up later, and hopefully more examples are going to follow.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to Sebastian. So what was interesting talking to you is about the kind of innovative model of financing that you have created, which is not really based on debt, which is what we are currently taking on. And I think there's a kind of an interesting challenge with it, because if you look at Bangladesh and its current financial position in terms of the macroeconomic, attracting the kind of funding that is needed for decarbonization, it has to come from outside, but bringing that in also has its very serious consequences, because it really increases the country's debt rate. So I'm quite interested in one of the, in the way that your project is structured. So the question is, can you explain to everyone how that is done? And where do you see that model can be deployed outside the solar space in terms of the larger investments that's needed for climate action?
All right, that's a handful. Thank you, Vidova. And thanks to the German Embassy, GIZ, and Mustafis, of course, for having me here. Just to relay a little bit on what you said before, Vidova, I think there's a bit of a fallacy if we tend to quote how many of the top 10 factories in the world are in Bangladesh, and that's great. But we tend to forget that there are a couple of thousand factories. And as you said, even if those funds exist, who has access to them? And even if they do, and we just heard it from you, sir, how complex and how long does it take? And the result we see, the result is that we have just 100 megawatt peak plus instead of a couple gigawatts. And often when we right now talk to factories and we ask a simple question, do you want to do an OPEX or a CAPEX project? And then, no, we do CAPEX, we can do it. I do think that many fundamentally underestimate what it means to manage such an asset for 20 years, which is approximately the lifetime, but also then the payback is 4.5 years. Yes, in the Excel sheet. But we don't know, because we have very little data on actually how the system will perform. So I think we are still at stages where there is a lot of risk, and the best proof for this is if you go to any commercial bank right now with a rooftop solar project, they are saying this is too risky. And yet I see many people saying, oh, no, the duties don't need to be, we don't need to do anything for rooftop solar, it's already commercially viable. Yes and no. I think there are different shades. So what we were doing is we got a bit lucky at the end of the day. We have a great partner. It's the Danish company Bestseller. And we created a joint venture with them where Bestseller invested the majority of the equity. And then we went through the entire supplier list of Bestseller and said, okay, which are the factories who have the highest potential, but also, and to be honest, who are most dependent on Bestseller? Because that ensures for us that they pay back. And that ensures for us that we have some idea and some sway over their willingness and ability to pay. Willingness because there is pressure, and ability because as long as the orders are coming in, the producer has money to pay back. So I think this is an interesting way to take a little bit risk out of the equation if you do a 10, 20-year build, own and operate, or OPEX as we say here in Bangladesh, project. So that's how it works. Solskjaer in that JV acts basically as we manage the JV, we manage the whole process of the EPC and the operations and maintenance. So far it's going really well. We had a target of 10 megawatt peak. We now doubled it to 20 because there's a lot happening. And I think this is how really a brand can actively drive and can also have an influence. Because another thing is what I see is if OPEX models are being implemented, who owns the carbon reductions? Not the factory, not the brand. But the brand can also not report on them because they don't own them. And otherwise it's double counting. So I think we still have a few question marks here, and we really need to come together. I think you said it needs to be a collective action, and Elvan just said it. it's not enough if a few good players, a few good brands, a few like Bestseller and H&M, a few good companies. We need a wide, broader spectrum. And coming back to the OPEX, who do we choose for OPEX? We obviously choose the best factories. It's a very natural selection. And we choose factories who have a certain size. If we go under 0.5 megawatt, it becomes not very attractive to us. So again, the same problem. We have a couple thousand factories, and we're probably leaving those behind. And that's something we need to tackle. And I think that's especially where you have to say, there it is not yet fully commercially viable. There it still needs support from players across. And with this just launched OTS, what we want True Soul, what we created, what we want to really do is we want to bring different stakeholders, similar to what Elvan just described, on board with the brands so that the historically rather transactional relationship between brands and factories really becomes a joint effort and a really rethinking that supply chain, that we're all sitting in the same boat at the end of the day, and get the brands on board, get support on board, that we can, over a much wider sector, much deeper into the sector, that we can accelerate that decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And it's nice to see that these type of new models coming in where the brands are actually participating from an equity point of view. I just want to give you an example. So one of the things that we visualized was how do we, it's easy for me to ask, how do we finance it beyond debt? So one model we created, and it's a hypothetical model, and I hope some of the brands will take it up, is something called the Fair Climate Fund. And how that operates is very similar to the Fair Trade Fund. And what we said was, if each partner across the value chain puts 1% of their top line into a pot, the product will increase by 2%. This is a 2 trillion industry. How much would 2% actually add to that? Now, the advantage of that is actually, because it's a fund that is created, it can be invested without waiting for a payback. So, and what we need is more innovation in funding space that is not purely looking, all the innovations we've seen is really about innovations around debt. It's de-risking, it's reducing the rates, but I think that's not enough. I want to turn to Julian, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a tough one to tackle. I hope that's okay. We've been talking about vulnerability. We've been talking about heat stress for the whole time. And I want to say, I've been in quite a lot of climate and sustainability conferences. And probably last year was the first time a major climate conference actually started talking about workers. Now, why this is relevant is also because we know CSDDD has very specific obligations on decent work. And this is going to be a problem with the heat waves across the board. So maybe a question for you is that, how do we find ways to how do we, rather than only talking about decarbonization, how do we think about financing adaptation, especially for heat stress among factories? Because we spent quite a long time trying to take away the moniker that apparel industry, fashion industry is a sweatshop. And we are recreating it, not because of anything else, because of climate.
Thank you for the question. Maybe before answering it, I will answer another question that I'm asking myself, because we are speaking about decarbonization, but I believe we did not mention much about energy efficiency. So there is one thing about making green energy, there is another thing about not consuming it. So I think this is also important to make fund available for such equipment. Just coming back to facts and data, if you consider the energy consumption of Bangladesh, 50% roughly is industry. And within this 30% is the RMG and textile. So which means RMG and textile overall energy consumption of Bangladesh is 15%, okay? And for them, there is this master plan that was made for energy efficiency, and the largest margin we can have for energy efficiency is within this RMG industry. So we proposed a project and we worked with ITCOL on one fund. It was 100 million euro to assist companies, not only RMG, but also RMG, on availing the availability of the fund, but also accessibility. About accessibility, sorry, with a technical assistant that helps from the very start when the company is reaching out to the commercial bank to help them all throughout the project. So now coming back to adaptation, thank you for asking this question. Very recently, last year, we initiated this bilateral adaptation pact with Bangladesh, where France has committed 1 billion euro over 5 years to support Bangladesh in its effort to adaptation. So we are currently working with the government in developing the roadmap to implement such project. So the way we are thinking is not to target specific industry to that, but to help strengthen the overall adaptation of Bangladesh, in particular in flood-prone areas. Ultimately, of course, supporting the efforts to make the RMG industry more resilient to some shocks.
Thank you very much, and I'm really excited to see the, I know 1 million euros is not much, but we have to start, and I think there's a lot of work first need to, as you correctly pointed out, defining the roadmap, and I fully agree with you, energy efficiency seems to be overlooked, and to me, this is the #1 priority because it's fast, and it directly reduces the natural gas import dependency that we have. I am now going to ask Ali Mustafa, but this is about really what's unique about Denmark is that it's one of the countries that has a very high variable renewable energy penetration. I know this is it's a long way for Bangladesh to go. But I think how Denmark has seamlessly integrated renewable energy into the grid is something that's quite interesting from a technology point of view. And we heard from the government officials that renewable energy integration technology is one thing that we need. So that and maybe think about how Denmark can support also in climate finance. At the end of the day, I mean, we keep saying that Bangladesh is highly vulnerable, but it's what people in this part of the world is paying is not for a problem they've created. So we talk about climate justice, we talk about climate debt, right? Now, what I would be lovely to see is that climate debt repaid not through additional debt, but through a different mechanism, because I don't think a lot of the countries who are highly vulnerable are in any way able to actually take additional debt. Your thoughts, please.
Is it working? It is. Good. Well, thanks for a very good question. And thanks for all the panelists for giving the different views from company level. And then we're kind of moving up on a more global kind of approach. So first thing first, you're right. Denmark is very much ahead in terms of high levels of renewable energy in our energy mix, as well as its integration. We have some of the most robust grids in the world. And also, we have decarbonized the, sorry, not decarbonized, but decoupled the economy and carbon emissions, right? So although Bangladesh has a long way to go, you always start from somewhere. And for me, the message is quite simple, that when it comes to international partnerships for funding, and whether that's with Denmark or France or other multilaterals, that's probably the most efficient and effective way to actually attract the investments that are sustainable to transform the economy. So not just transform the companies, but the economy as such. And of course, it starts with companies. On that point, I would say there's probably 3 aspects. Why is that international partnerships are important and so vital to attract this investment? and maybe give you a few examples of existing projects that we have here from the Danish side, and then also how it actually can help create growth, right, locally. And then we'll touch upon the climate finance part as well, because it's all integrated. Throughout the day, we've heard how Bangladesh has progressed to where it is, right? And if you look at the EU's everything but arms, it's been instrumental in the growth of this industry. So that's wonderful. And that's also been instrumental in the trade between Denmark and Bangladesh, for example, which stands at $1.6 billion right now. But we have an investment portfolio, active investment portfolio, above $2 billion right now. And it is cross-sectoral. It covers pharma, food, but also renewable energy, as well as logistics. And those two sectors are very interesting, because when we view at projects that can, and funding that can help transform Bangladesh and its industries and its supply chains, I would highlight probably three things. One is our funding for IFC's PACT, which is now going into the Bangladesh Climate Action Program, which is there to work with the industry to identify where you can become greener and also mobilize funding. So that's one way of doing it. But what we look at is that, of course, you need to build green factories, hopefully more than just the top 10 or top 100, to make the industrial processes more sustainable. But it's also about the infrastructure that goes around. So when you mentioned that H&M and other brands have gone together at the last COP to announce the Renewable Fashion Fund for the offshore project here in Bangladesh, that makes us very happy, because Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners itself is a pioneer in offshore wind energy. They have assets around the world. And there is this 500 megawatt project, but not just a project, it's a breakthrough project, right? Because it would be the first of its kind in Bangladesh and the first of its kind in South Asia. So Bangladesh would actually be taking up technological leadership to transform its own economy. It would be a project that would be, help with energy independence. So instead of relying solely on imported coal and gas, etc., it would be complementary. And that is direly needed, because solar power is needed. Solar power on rooftops is needed, and it's coming. But you do need large-scale green power. And that's where this project comes in. It's a $1.3, $1.5 billion investment, potentially. And it's a project that we, of course, support and would facilitate. So that would provide the green power to the industry, but also you have a logistics project that I would highlight. The first and most greenest port coming up in Chittagong by another Danish consortium led by Maersk and APMT. Again, that would allow us to start decarbonizing and move towards more sustainable logistics in the country. And all of these things are important, because decarbonization and funding is not just about funding. It's not just about investments. It's about mobilizing investments, yes, in order to decarbonize, yes, but also to ensure market access, to ensure access to technology, and to ensure skills upgradation and local jobs, right? So when we go about doing things from the Danish side, we take an integrated approach to supply chain and value chain development. So we are taking a multi-pronged approach in how we partner with Bangladesh at a national level, bilateral level, Bangladesh, Denmark, but also through our partners within the EU, our partners with the World Bank, IFC, etc. And the best way of mobilizing and addressing this financing gap, there's different levels, but I would say foreign direct investment is key. It is absolutely the key here, because you're right, how much debt can you take on? How much capital can the factories on themselves mobilize? How much can the brands help mobilize? So what we're doing is to, on the one hand, work with our multilateral partners, our regional partners in the EU, to mobilize capital, but also to encourage private investors and facilitating them to come to Bangladesh and invest here and to smoothen that process, because clearly we have a number of issues on both the regulatory front as well as in terms of ease of doing business here. But I'll keep it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I really like the way that you described how that partnered approach has to come in. And if I have well, I have many complaints, but one of the complaints that I've always seen is that how we don't take that approach of collective action for co-creating solutions. Right now, one of the things I've seen is quite a lot of solutions are there, and they seem fragmented and they seem partial. And the challenge is that if we don't co-create, we don't have ownership, but also we don't see the full space of the problem. So a lot of the initiatives that we say in this space, we may create funds, and we think the missing part is funds, but the funds cannot be disbursed. We see programs that identify projects to do, but then the funds are not there to execute them, or we don't understand the larger context within these projects exist and what are the barriers, because we work with assumptions. So I think the invitation for all of us, for the brands to manufacturers and international organizations, is that we need to get into a better way of co-creating solutions so that we address what's actually contextual problems rather than helicoptering in solutions. And one hope that I have, we are at the conclusion of the day. We came, and compared to last year's conference, this conference has been quite exciting because the ideas, the projects that we are talking about is completely different level. And I hope next year, when we sit down together, we will actually talk about very specifically projects beyond debt. We will actually talk about how to expand accessibility to across the industry as opposed to the larger companies. And the spirit of collaboration and partnership I heard here from all the panelists is going to go beyond small-scale pilot projects to something that truly scales. So thank you very much for this wonderful panel. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have all of you. Thank you very much for staying on.